From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Coming up today from Oklahoma State University, Derrell offering his latest insight on the cattle market trends. Among other things, Derrell will talk about the economics of turning calves out on wheat pasture this fall. Then, K-State's Bob Larson and Brad White will take up two timely matters of interest for you cow-calf producers, providing the proper trace mineral supplementation for the herd here in the fall, and fall vaccination programs for the spring-calving cow herd at preg-check time. And further ahead on this week's 4-H segment, Jeff Wickman talks with K-State's Amy Sollock about National 4-H Week and the 48 Hours of 4-H Community Service Initiative. All this and more next on Agriculture Today. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. We're glad that you're along with us for Agriculture Today here on the K-State Radio Network, opening up, as usual, on a Monday with a look at the cattle markets and what's happening there. And this time, thoughts from Derrell. Derrell, livestock economist at Oklahoma State University, as you know it. Derrell, we can begin on a positive note. It was a rather solid upward move in the fed cattle prices this past week. What was behind that?
Well, I think there's several things going on. If you look over the last several weeks, I think this really marks, pretty much the end of the sort of impacts and residual effects of the pack and plant fire. The fed cattle market has probably been the slowest to recover, but I think this kind of suggests we're there. And the other part of it is seasonal. As a result of the reduced packing capacity, there's been more stress on fed cattle markets, but we're moving into some smaller numbers. We're moving into a time seasonally when we expect to see a little bit of strength in these fed cattle markets. So I think we're sort of seeing that. And again, we're kind of back on track, if you will, more or less on a seasonal basis. Because there is seasonality to this, is that to suggest that maybe this market isn't done building back up, if you will? We could see a little bit more strength going forward. We've done a good job through all of this, all of these shocks with staying current. Carcass weights are increasing seasonally, but they're not above last year. And so, we've stayed current. We haven't gotten behind. We haven't done anything to really jeopardize the idea that through the fourth quarter, we can see a little bit of seasonal strength in these fed cattle markets. Did we get much help, though, from the boxed beef trade this past week? Well, boxed beef, of course, has been going the other way from the post-fire spike that we had. It came back down rather quickly to pre-fire levels, and now we're kind of in, a seasonal pattern here. For another month, we have a little bit weaker boxed beef market. What's going on, of course, we're moving in finally to some fall weather, and that's crock pot and pot roast kind of season, so we see the end meats pick up a little bit seasonally, but ribs and loins are actually pretty weak this time of the year. Now, in another month, we'll start buying prime rib for the Christmas season, and we'll see that rib market pick back up. But we're probably a few weeks away from that yet. As most folks know, Derrell, you keep very close tabs on wheat pasturing prospects in Kansas and Oklahoma, the Southern Plains region. What's happening there, and how do the economics of those programs look right now? Well, in terms of what's possible out there, we've got a pretty good start, at least what I see and hear around Oklahoma. We've got a pretty good start to some decent wheat pasture. The plantings have really, jumped very fast in the last week or so, 2 weeks really, and the emergence is quick. We've had warm temperatures, wet conditions. I heard anecdotally of one case the other day where a producer thought he was within a week or 10 days of turning out on wheat. Now, there's certainly not very much that's that ready yet, but I think we'll have quite a bit of wheat wheat here down in Oklahoma, at least in the southern half of the state, that'll be ready to graze certainly by the end of October into the 1st of November. And that's about as early as we ever expect to see it. So that's there. We got to watch armyworms and grasshoppers and some other things that are always a challenge for early planted wheat. But short of problems with that, we're in pretty good shape. And we're sort of seeing that now kind of kick into some, stocker cattle demand. Those markets, again, have been kind of actually creeping up, and that's a little bit counter-seasonal, but it does happen this time of year when we have good wheat pasture prospects.
So wheat pasture productivity, if everything continues, looks like it won't be an issue at all. Will the program pay, though, as you're looking at it right now?
Obviously the budgets have been pretty volatile here lately with all of the dynamics we've had in these markets over the past few weeks. But, if you look at what futures markets did, the feeder cattle futures really doesn't matter which month you look at. Of course, we had a big gap down after the fire, and then we actually went even lower than that about 2 or 3 weeks later. And then over the last 3 weeks or so, we've had a $9 to $10 rally in those fed cattle futures. And so when you take where we're at today with fed cattle futures, and run it back into the prices, which again are a little bit on the weak side right now, although they've been improving a little bit on the buy side, the margins actually look pretty decent right now. I think there's a bit of an opportunity there for winter stockers, and producers probably might want to, take a look at whether they need to lock some of that in at this point.
Well, Derrell, you posted something on social media just not too long ago, and this is on the trade front now, talking about China, its ongoing and severe issues with African swine fever ravaging its pork industry. You're thinking that China might start buying more beef in lieu of pork consumption. You might elaborate on that.
Well, I think it's pretty clear. I mean, we don't know for sure. I'm not sure China knows for sure, but, the estimates I see right now are that China has probably lost upwards of 50% of their hog herd this past year, and pork production is probably down a full 25% in China. And that's a huge number. China, of course, produces half of the world's pork, so, a loss in that market is a big deal. And they're trying to make that up, first and foremost, with pork from around the world, including the U.S., but they're inevitably going to have to reach out for other proteins. So they're going to turn next to chicken in most cases, and so they'll be looking at those sources, and in terms of ramping up their own domestic production of chicken, but they will import more beef as well. Now, they're not importing much from the U.S. They never have, really. We didn't have much beef going there before the tariffs, and of course, with the tariffs in place, we're very much the last resort. But indirectly, beef markets and all protein markets around the world are going to see some support from this huge event that's going on primarily in China. And it's actually spilling out of China now. Of course, we've got several other Asian countries that have African swine fever problems, and it's in some other parts of the world, in Eastern Europe and so on. So the bottom line is that issue alone is going to have a supportive effect directly or indirectly in virtually all protein markets, that we will probably export more of our very large supplies of pork from the U.S. to China. And so we'll see that, and that helps pretty directly in the U.S. market. Some of the rest of it is indirect. If you look at the demand for beef in China, that's growing, even though we're not part of it at this point, but increasing flows of beef into China from South America, Australia, New Zealand, and so on, is changing global beef flows, and the U.S. is certainly in a position to see some indirect effects as a result of that. In
other words, other markets will be more availed. So,
yep, you bet.
Also in the trade arena, of course, that United States-Mexico-Canada trade agreement remaining in limbo in Congress as lawmakers are distracted with other things, asking the question if USMCA remains on the shelf for the remainder of this calendar year 2019, even into 2020. What problems does that create for the beef cattle sector?
Well, if I understand it correctly, at this point in time, we're still operating under the old NAFTA rules, and I don't believe there's been any sort of deadline put on that at this point. So unless one comes about where we would face a threat of losing NAFTA, which is in place, and that happened before we got the new version of NAFTA, the USMCA, approved and in place, then that would have significant consequences. But at this point in time, my understanding is that we can operate under the old NAFTA rules going forward until somebody says we're not going to anymore. And as long as that doesn't happen, then I don't think postponing approval of USMCA is going to be a big deal. But at some point, of course, we're going to have to take action. Somebody is going to insist. And so it will be important to get it done and to remove the uncertainty and the sort of threat that goes with not having either the old NAFTA or the new NAFTA in place. So it's certainly an issue that needs to be resolved, but I'm not sure there's an immediate timeline here that's necessarily that threatening.
So much of agriculture, though, is eager to see the new NAFTA, to put it that way, forwarded and put into law because there are some inherent advantages over the old NAFTA, it appears.
There are some tweaks in the new version that would certainly be beneficial, and again, I would maintain that the biggest impact there would just be removing the uncertainty, which is part of a much bigger set of uncertainties associated with all of these trade issues and a number of other issues that are out there right now. I think the beef industry, as well as many other agricultural markets, have continued to operate under this cloud of uncertainty, which is having a negative impact, but it's very difficult to sort of measure and really be aware of exactly how much it's impacting us.
We'll see if the calls for passage of USMCA are heard here in the coming weeks. Lastly, as you look to the trading week before us, any expectations as to still better prices ahead?
I think this fed cattle market is looking like it's in pretty good shape. Again, we're sort of moving into a little bit tighter supply seasonally. That removes some of that pressure on the packing capacity that we've been stretching pretty hard here since the plant went down to the fire. So I think there's a chance here that we can see these prices certainly hold stable, if not push a little bit higher as we go forward. Again, we're not really bumping up against the box beef market yet. At some point we might do that, and that would limit things, but that's not really an issue yet at this point in time. So we've got a good chance there. The feeder cattle markets, as we get later into the fall, we'll see the fall calf run, the seasonal pressure on prices. That may not happen until very late in October or into November. Most producers have good forage, and that may give them a little more flexibility to not be in a real big hurry to market calves this fall. When you combine that with emerging stocker cattle demand, I think there's a decent chance for these feeder markets to at least hold where they are, if not actually go up just a little bit more for another week or two.
We always appreciate getting your input, Derrell, and a pleasure to talk with you once more. We'll catch up again soon. Many thanks.
You bet. Anytime.
Livestock economist Derrell Peel, Oklahoma State University, providing us his thoughts on the cattle market trends here on This Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Next up for you on Agriculture Today, good input for you cow-calf producers from a couple of K-State veterinarians. They teamed up for the latest Cattle Chat podcast from the Beef Cattle Institute here at K-State did Brad White and Bob Larson. Today they're addressing 2 topics that are universal to just about every cow-calf operation out there. Brad leads off the discussion.
This question comes up all the time. How important are trace minerals? So if I'm a cow-calf operation, how important are trace minerals? And let's focus on the cows.
Yes. Well, this is an important question because it gets a lot of press, and you can certainly run into some problems when we're short of trace minerals. But let's first of all maybe define trace minerals. So trace minerals are those minerals that are needed in relatively small amounts. And some of the most common ones that we see in the central part of the United States that we run into problems with are copper, zinc, selenium, and occasionally manganese or some others as well.
But it's not a problem everywhere. Right? There are regional differences as you look across the U.S. in where the deficiencies are.
Yeah, these trace minerals, so minerals are in the soil, and so the level of minerals that a herd is exposed to has a lot to do with the soil and the plants that are growing on those soils. So that you can even have some herds that are relatively close to each other that have different needs. I also want to point out, though, that because trace minerals are needed in small amounts, that doesn't mean that's unimportant. But it is also important to remember the minerals that are needed in large amounts. And the mineral that is needed in the largest amount is salt. So all cattle have a daily need for salt, and that's really regardless of where they are in the United States. Other major minerals that are needed in larger amounts for cattle are calcium and phosphorus. And those needs go up during lactation when the cow is nursing her calf. And those also, though, are very dependent on the soils and where you are, both time of year and where you are geographically. So salt, calcium, and phosphorus are our main concerns and are probably more commonly a problem. But these trace minerals can be a problem.
And I think that's the key, is figuring out what matches your locale. The other part that I think where we need to be sure we're doing well on minerals is tracking how much they consume. Because it's easy to, if you're doing it in blocks or you're doing loose mineral or free choice mineral, you put it out and you say, okay, well, when do I fill it again? It's when it's empty or when I'm going to be in the pasture again. It might make sense to track it because all of those products have a label expected dose, recommended dose. If they're way over consuming, way under consuming, I want to figure out what's going on.
I think that's exactly right. So if you can keep track of kind of the disappearance of the mineral from the pasture, I think that's really important to do. Because if it's disappearing too fast, that could be that you're losing it to wind or other losses. And mineral is pretty expensive, and so I would want to minimize that loss. Or it's possible that the cattle are just consuming a lot more than really was anticipated, in which case sometimes we'll mix a little more salt into the mineral mix to decrease the consumption. Or, on the other hand, if they're not consuming enough, that they're not eating enough of the mineral, again, if the whole idea was to meet their mineral needs, if they're not eating enough, I may need to do some flavor enhancers, so things like molasses or soybeans or something that really is a good flavor enhancer. I might need to adjust how I'm delivering the mineral to get the consumption about right. And of course, cows will probably vary over time, but to get the consumption about right.
Which leads us to our Cattle Chat checklist for today, which is our top 5 considerations when I'm creating my mineral program.
All right. Number 5 is remember that salt is the mineral needed most by cattle.
Number 4, remember to evaluate what's my calcium-phosphorus ratio.
Okay. Number 3, let the cattle tell you if there's much of a problem. If they're performing extremely well reproductively and health-wise, probably the mineral profile is good too. But if performance is not where it should be, mineral nutrition is one of the things on the list to investigate.
And number 2, monitor consumption. So just like we talked about, a lot of times the way I'm monitoring that is I'm tracking when did I deliver to the pasture.
All right. And number 1 is if you decide that you need to investigate further a trace mineral problem, it will take some work. You need to get some liver samples, some blood samples, look at the feed and the water, and really kind of work up the problem to figure out if and which minerals might be deficient.
And that was our Cattle Chat checklist on things to consider in your managing your mineral program. I want to talk about vaccinating cows. And I'm going to split this up a little bit, Bob. And we're going to talk about our spring-calving cows and what vaccines we want to give to them at the time of preg-check. And on a future episode, we're going to talk about those fall-calving cows. Okay, so spring-calving cows, I'm bringing them in. It's preg-check time. We're wanting to vaccinate them. They're mid-gestation at this point. We just weaned their calves. What are some of the things that I'm thinking about relative to that vaccine program?
All right. As a veterinarian, if you gave me that scenario, probably I would have clients that did it differently depending on, first of all, how they managed their heifers and also what vaccine program they used earlier in the year, back in the spring. Really, the diseases that we're talking about are some diseases that cause abortions in cattle. So that's IBR, BVD, leptospirosis, and vibriosis. Those would be the diseases that we're kind of concerned about. And to be honest, it's much like vaccinating our children. If we do a really good job of setting up those replacement heifers to have good immunity against those disease-causing agents, then how we vaccinate the cows gives us some flexibility. Because the optimum timing for vaccination would be right before the risk.
Yeah, right before the risk. So, and you're thinking about, if we're worried about abortions, a lot of those pathogens that you just named, they cause problems mid-gestation to late.
Yeah. And so I'd want the vaccines in before now, mid-gestation, or if I was really going to optimize the timing. But a lot of times we don't work cattle a couple of months earlier than this. And so it's either give it a little bit late now or give it a little bit early in the spring. And what I was trying to say is if I've set up my heifers well enough so that they've got good immunity that carries over to when they're a little bit older, I have some flexibility. I can do it either a little bit too early in the spring or a little bit too late in the fall, and I'm okay because of the immunity that's carried over from previous years. We rarely give them the optimum, the absolute perfect time to vaccinate, but that's okay because we've got good herd immunity set up prior to now.
From the start. So I like your point of we want to vaccinate those heifers before they come in. I think fall preg-check time is a good time to vaccinate, and we're looking at that booster. Just like many of us, you get a vaccine, you get a annual booster. But for that annual booster to work, you have to have that initial
We already
period.
have good
You've
immunity.
already got some immunity to it, right?
Exactly.
And you build that immunity with this annual booster. And depending on what works in your operation, and I think one of the things you were referring to with flexibility, we'll sometimes talk about modified live or killed vaccines in cows. And one of the things that I think is really critical is follow the label. Make sure, those products are labeled in specific ways. Follow the label direction for both administration, handling, how you're going to put that vaccine together.
And we really have a lot of pretty good products out there that provide pretty good level of protection. Maybe one other point I'll make is that when I say pretty good level of protection, that's never 100%. So there's always the possibility for an abortion in a well-vaccinated herd if they're exposed to a lot of disease agents. So it's not a 100% protection, but these are pretty good products that provide us pretty good protection.
So you've got to also manage that disease challenge side. So protect the pregnant cow. Don't put her, one of the things that we think, I'm giving her vaccinations, that does not put armor plating on her. If I put her next to a whole bunch of stocker calves or a bunch of calves that she hasn't been exposed to while she's pregnant,
that can override my good vaccination program.
Absolutely. So. Good vaccination program won't make it through that. So on our cows, and you mentioned a couple things, and I just want to go back briefly, but the viral vaccine, so IBR and BVD are really what we're concerned about. Often those will have other components in the vaccine.
Right.
But on the bacterial side, we've got lepto and vibrio, which often come together. And you mentioned the vibrio might cause problems earlier in the gestation period, but lepto could cause it at any time, but mid to late is what we're thinking a lot of times with lepto. So now's not a bad time.
Yeah, fall is a good time for our lepto vaccine. And like I said, work closely with your veterinarian because they know how your heifers have been vaccinated and they know what products you did or did not use in the spring. And so as a veterinarian, I don't treat all herds the same. And a lot of it has to do with what we've done in the past with this herd to make sure that as you go into the later part of pregnancy, that those cows are protected.
And their level of exposure. And whether all those components are combined into one vaccine or they're in separate vaccines depends a lot on your situation and what my goals of the vaccine program are, because my goals aren't really just to vaccinate cattle. What's my goal? My goal is to stimulate protection at a level that's higher than my disease challenge. So I have to control the vaccines and exposures.
I think that's exactly right. You're looking for a healthy herd, and vaccines are one of the tools we use, but it's not the only tool.
Those remarks from veterinarians Brad White and Bob Larson of K-State. They're part of the staff of the Beef Cattle Institute here at the university, and they addressed more on this Cattle Chat podcast. You can listen to it in full at beefcattleinstitute.org. Again, beefcattleinstitute.org. This is Agriculture Today.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
Welcome back to the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Now to today's agricultural news headlines for you. These courtesy in part of DTN. The Trump administration on Friday released its long-awaited proposal to restore the renewable fuel standard and reallocate billions of gallons of biofuels granted in waivers to the petroleum industry. The Environmental Protection Agency will propose rules to ensure that more than 15 billion gallons of ethanol is blended in the year 2020 and require higher volumes of biodiesel to be blended as well. The EPA notes this will include accounting for relief expected to be provided for small refineries. The proposals will go through a rule-making process that includes seeking public comments. The EPA drew scorn back in August after the agency announced 31 small refiners had been granted exemptions from the RFS, accounting for 1.4 billion gallons of lost demand for ethanol and biodiesel. That led to negotiations at the White House involving the EPA, the USDA, and key senators to reach a deal. Now, under the new proposal, the EPA will account for small refinery exemptions starting in 2020 with a 3-year rolling average of volumes waived. The proposal will not account for prior year waivers already granted to small refiners, that according to an EPA official, along with ensuring that 15 billion gallons of conventional ethanol will be in the pipeline. EPA will also start a rulemaking process to streamline labeling and remove other barriers for the sale of E15 nationally. The USDA will also work to provide more infrastructure for biofuels, such as increasing blender pumps at retail outlets. Now, the USDA secretary was among those Friday applauding this agreement between the USDA and EPA regarding the next steps in building the nation's biofuel supply. Here's more from the USDA's Rod Bain.
One person excited over a new USDA Environmental Protection Agency agreement designed to improve upon the existing renewable fuel standard as a policy, Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue, who believes he spent
probably more hours on this than almost any other issue, including trade and labor.
The secretary, talking with reporters Friday, said he believes the main takeaway from the agreement was certainty for the renewable fuel industry.
It ensures the certainty of 15 billion gallons being 15 billion gallons, and EPA has agreed at the President's direction to reflect any potential small refinery waivers that are being issued to account for those in the overall total to ensure that the minimum of 15 billion gallons is obtained.
The agreement also calls for a public comment period to open soon on actions that would ensure increased conventional ethanol blending into fuels starting next year, as well as increasing consumer availability of E15 blended fuels. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
A federal judge has declined to block a Missouri law that bans companies from labeling plant-based meat products or meat substitutes as meat. U.S. District Judge Fernando Gayton Jr. said last week he would not issue a preliminary injunction to stop Missouri agricultural officials from enforcing the law. That law says a product cannot be marketed as meat unless it comes from an animal with 2 or 4 feet. This according to the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, as it reported. Turtle Island Foods, which produces Tofurkey products, the American Civil Liberties Union, and the Good Food Institute appealed that decision. They're arguing the law violates their free speech rights. The law was approved by the Missouri legislature in 2018. It gives that state's Department of Agriculture the power to investigate and refer potential labeling violations to the Attorney General's office or to a county prosecutor. Now, supporters contend they're trying to protect the products raised by ranchers, pork producers, and chicken and turkey producers. Gayton wrote in his opinion that the plaintiffs have not shown that they are at any risk of either prosecution for violating the statute or that there is any need to change their labels or advocacy efforts, in the judge's words. The coalition earlier this year sued the state of Arkansas, saying a similar law in that state also censors speech, and similar law in Mississippi. Also in litigation, other states with labeling laws include Montana, South Dakota, Louisiana, and Wyoming. Do want to quickly note here that research updates are the cornerstone of K-State's annual Swine Day. It's now on the calendar, planned for Thursday, November the 21st here on the campus. The event will kick off with a trade show at 8 o'clock that morning at K-State's Alumni Center. It'll conclude about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, highlighting research updates by K-State swine faculty, highlighting nutrition, management, feed processing, feed safety, much more to the program. Register online, and more details on K-State Swine Day 2019 as well can be found at ksuswine.org. Now on to this week's edition of Tree Tales. Here's K-State Forester, Jaron Tyndall. Jaron?
Believe it or not, Kansas has a long history of forestry research and experimentation. One of the first experiments planned and carried out by the Kansas State Agricultural College was the planting of forest trees. The main purpose of the early forestry work was to improve people's standard of living through the planting of hardy trees for windbreaks and wood production. Forestry and horticultural reports from the 1870s to the 1930s provide many insights into the progress of farmstead establishment on the open plains. In 1872, Professor E. Gale of the Horticulture Department said in reference to the early college plantings, "The land selected for forest culture is the least adapted to the cultivation of roots and cereals of any now broken up on the college farm. This selection, all things considered, was thought best, for it is in general this quality of soil, the high, gravelly, and broken ridges, which should ultimately be planted to forests. It is, then, a matter of interest to learn what may be expected as a result of forest culture on such exposed situations as the one selected. As was anticipated, the growth of the young trees has not been so vigorous as it would have been on lower and richer land, but still abundantly sufficient to give the most encouraging promise of success." In 1901, J.J. Alexander of the Kansas Horticultural Society said in reference to tree plantings near Norton, "All our forest trees have done fairly well and have added greatly to the beauty of northwest Kansas in our homes. We can only appreciate the beauty of trees of various kinds by looking back to the time when this was one vast plain, without trees which now dot the landscape with shade and beauty." Like most stories of progress, the long-term results of forestry work in Kansas are a mixture of good and bad. That getting trees to grow here was truly work for the early settlers is sometimes hard to imagine today, when invasive tree removal is a yearly chore for many landowners. When you reflect on the livability of a farmstead today, you may not care whether it grows its own timber for fuel and building material, but a few moments' reflection on the comforts provided by windbreaks and shade trees will give you some perspective on why tree establishment was a high priority for early Kansans endeavoring to make a home on the range. This has been Jaron Tyndall with the Kansas Forest Service, bringing you another Tree Tale.
Thanks, Jaron, and this is Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining us on Agriculture Today. I'm Jeff Wickman. 4-H is the nation's largest youth development organization, empowering nearly 6 million young people across the U.S., including approximately 80,000 in Kansas. The new 4-H year started this month, and this week is National 4-H Week. The theme, Inspire Kids to Do, is again the campaign focus. Southwest Area 4-H Youth Development Specialist Amy Sollock has more on National 4-H Week and one of its unique highlights for Kansas youth, 48 Hours of 4-H. Amy, National 4-H Week is underway, started yesterday and runs through the 12th. This is really an awareness campaign for 4-H.
Yeah, we're very excited. We've got millions of kids, parents, volunteers from across the country that are celebrating National 4-H Week, and we've got lots of fun things happening right here in Kansas. We want folks to know who we are and what we're about. We want them to understand that 4-H is available for all kids from all backgrounds, and we have something for everyone.
And this is something that ties in with the fact that this is the new 4-H year.
Yeah, so we just celebrated the launch or the kickoff of our new year. Begins October 1 last week. and nothing like National 4-H Week to sort of celebrate that and really get the word out and spread the news about how you can join 4-H and how it's accessible by everybody.
The theme, Inspire Kids to Do, and that's really something that is kind of a hands-on process when you talk about 4-H.
Yeah, we kind of launched Inspire Kids to Do last year, and it's really just now gaining momentum. We didn't really want to switch gears, and it's still kind of what we're all about. Basically, the heart of our 4-H program is finding that spark, that thing that kids really are passionate about and interested in, and inspiring them to do, whether that is baking, growing, taking photographs, you name it, whatever they're doing, we want them to do more of, and through the doing, they're learning, and that's what we want to inspire kids to do.
I think I saw on the website that they refer to that as project-based learning, that really problem-solving and learning collaboration and the hands-on that I was talking about.
Yeah, we've always been about learning by doing. Everything we do in 4-H is hands-on, experientially based learning. And what we have found, in the last 100 years is that by identifying kind of project areas or topics that kids are interested and passionate about, they learn a whole slew of other skills. So, while they might learn skill-specific things like cooking and baking, we're also teaching leadership. We're also teaching communication. We're also teaching how to learn in collaboration with peers. It's all those other skills that are sort of weaved into that hands-on learning experience that makes it so special.
All of those life skills that they can use throughout their careers.
Absolutely. Every project we have lends itself to a degree of some kind or a certificate, which will then take them on down the road and into some kind of a career or a profession. And 4-H can help foster that sort of early identification of what a child might like to do someday.
You talked about project areas, and there are a number of project areas, really something for, I would think, any youth out there. If they're looking for something, it's probably offered in one way or another through 4-H.
Sure. We have over 30 different project areas, everything from clothing and textiles to electricity, leadership, robotics, you name it, we've got it. And really, as a parent, I find that that's something really enticing and unique to Kansas 4-H is that there is something for everyone. It's one organization that the whole family can enjoy together, and they can still learn about their individual interests, but it's something to enjoy and grow together as a family.
Another thing that's unique about Kansas 4-H in terms of National 4-H Week is the 48 hours of 4-H.
Yes. So a big component of the 4-H program is service learning. We want kids to understand and value the importance of giving back to their community and being a part of something bigger than themselves. So on the second weekend of National 4-H Week, we have what we call 48 hours of 4-H. And it's kind of an intense 48-hour challenge, if you will, to 4-H members, clubs, different groups of families to get together and give back to their communities. And it can be anything that the kids identify as a need. So some of our kids go out and maybe spend time at an elder care facility. Some of our kids help at a community garden. Some of them are doing painting and cleanup projects. We have food drives and clothing drives. So the second weekend of National 4-H Week, October 11th and 12th, we'll have lots of kids doing some amazing things all across the state.
I know animal projects are also big.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's probably what people kind of identify us as. And while we certainly have lots of new interest areas and lots of program offerings beyond traditional livestock or agriculture, that is still very much a strong tradition for Kansas 4-H and one that we're proud of also.
In terms of the 48 hours of 4-H, you'd also like people to share what they're doing on social media?
Oh, yeah. Social media is a really great opportunity to spread the word and kind of create an awareness of what we're doing. And so you'll see a lot of 4-H clubs, 4-H parents, 4-H alumni, maybe telling their own testimonies on what 4-H has meant to them and how 4-H has made an impact on their family. You'll see a lot of hashtag Inspire Kids to Do. And hopefully, I'm excited. We'll hear and we'll get to see pictures of amazing young people across the state that are learning and growing and transforming into young leaders.
this is also an opportunity to invite friends and family to take part as well.
Yeah, absolutely. This is probably the best time of year to join 4-H. We have open enrollment, so no matter what time of year you find out about a club or you would like to join, you can join year-round. But since the new year began on October 1st, right now is a really great time to kind of get in on the front end of things and get to experience the whole year through. So visit Kansas4-H.org, and on our website there's several different opportunities to find the contact information for your local K-State Research and Extension office or specific clubs in your local community.
And you'd also like people to report on the projects that they take part in.
Yeah, we really want to know, how many hours kids gave back, how many kids, how many adults were involved. Some of the fun numbers to learn are, how many pounds of food were collected, how many articles of clothing were donated, and when you kind of, lump them all together, it's really staggering the impact that we can make in just 48 hours of 4-H.
That's Southwest Area 4-H Youth Development Specialist Amy Sollock. Again, for more information, contact your local county or district extension office or visit kansas4h.org. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.